When my son died, his wife inherited the house and 25 million and then kicked me out saying, "You're not welcome here anymore. Go die in the trash." But a few days later, the lawyer laughed and said, "Did you listen carefully to the will? What was in the will caused my daughter-in-law to faint from shock." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The polished wooden coffin shone beneath the overcast Texas heavens, with storm clouds looming but no downpour yet. 37 mourners gathered around my son's burial site, their dark attire resembling ravens perched on the vibrant spring turf. I clutched Jeffrey's third-grade picture in my aged fingers, the borders worn smooth from decades of handling. My child was lost at just 45, claimed by the disease regardless. Zella stationed herself at the front of the coffin, embodying the sorrowful spouse flawlessly. Her upscale black gown likely exceeded the monthly earnings of many attendees. Those impeccably groomed nails coated in deep crimson lay on the glossy surface as if she possessed it, as if she controlled it all. The pastor was midway through his talk on everlasting peace when she stirred. Her stilettos tapped on the graveyard paths as she neared me, that rehearsed compassion etched on her features. "Clyde," she murmured, yet audible enough for Mrs. Henderson and the Johnsons to catch. Her flawlessly cared-for hand brushed my sleeve. "I trust you realize you won't be remaining in my residence after today." The statement struck like freezing rain. A few bystanders fidgeted awkwardly, feigning ignorance, but they'd overheard. All of them had. I squeezed Jeffrey's image more firmly, sensing my jaw clench. "This is my boy's place, Zella. Was your boy's place?" Her tone dripped with that refined poison she'd mastered. "Now it's mine." Jeffrey bequeathed it all to his devoted spouse. Mrs. Henderson stifled a gasp behind her gloved palm. Obie Smith moved nearer, his rugged features tightening. These folks had known Jeffrey from his toddler days. They'd seen him grow his building company from scratch. "We haven't reviewed the testament yet," I replied softly, maintaining composure despite the rage simmering inside. Zella chuckled, genuinely chuckled at my son's burial. "What's there to review? I'm his spouse. Who else would he gift fortunes to?" The pastor halted mid-phrase, visibly uneasy. People were gawking now, some averting their eyes in discomfort. This was meant to honor Jeffrey, to celebrate his legacy. Instead, this lady was transforming it into her own spectacle. "The departed was a benevolent soul," the pastor resumed, attempting to steer the ceremony back. "A cornerstone of our town a cornerstone who understood family care," Zella cut in, grinning at me with those icy azure eyes. His true family. That's when it dawned on me. This wasn't sorrow or avarice speaking. This was tactics. She'd orchestrated this instant, selected this communal venue where I couldn't react as my instincts urged, where she could craft her story before observers. The pastor wrapped up his invocation as soil started tumbling onto Jeffrey's coffin. Each scoop seemed to shatter another fragment of my heart, but Zella's smug grin, that victorious little smirk as she observed my expression, was etching itself into my mind. She resumed her widow act, receiving sympathies from individuals who'd known Jeffrey since his youth, portraying the bereaved partner, while my genuine anguish was discarded like old news. As they descended my son into the Texas earth, I vowed to myself, whatever scheme Zella believed she was executing, she'd chosen the incorrect rival. The downpour finally arrived as the final spade struck. As the group scattered to their vehicles, I lingered. The burial workers had completed their task, and Jeffrey's interim headstone tilted in the new soil. I set my lone red rose on the heap, the identical type his mother cultivated in our yard 3 decades past. Zella's giggles echoed from afar in the graveyard, where she entertained a cluster of attendees, likely weaving her tale of the unfortunate widow's load. The breeze tousled my silver locks, and joint pain delivered its usual twinges through my fingers as I gazed at that school snapshot. Jeffrey at 8, with a gap-toothed smile and a stubborn cowlick that refused to stay down. When had that lively youngster turned into the gaunt-faced adult I'd seen in that Houston medical facility? March 2023. MD Anderson Cancer Center. The scent of disinfectant couldn't mask the dread in that environment. Jeffrey had shed 40 pounds by that point, his costly outfits dangling on his diminishing body. The trial therapies weren't succeeding, but he persisted in battling, always battling. "Dad, I need you to know I've secured your future," he'd stated that day, clasping my hand with digits that resembled fragile twigs. "No matter what, you're safeguarded." I hadn't grasped it at the time. Assumed he referred to the insurance policy, perhaps a savings fund. Jeffrey had always been dependable, even as a child, hoarding coins in glass jars. But observing him endure those closing months, I noticed something more. Terror, not of passing. Jeffrey feared little, but terror of departing matters unresolved, leaving loved ones vulnerable. The recollection jumped back 2 decades prior. Jeffrey, at 25, positioned in what would evolve into his initial workspace, a leased area over Murphy's tool shop with a collapsible table as his workstation and ambitions vaster than Texas. "I'll never face poverty like we did, Dad," he'd sworn, laboring 16-hour shifts to convert that $5,000 advance into something substantial, developing neighborhoods across 3 regions, generating employment, bringing joy to families and residences his firm erected. Prosperity arrived swiftly once it began. First million at 35, 10 million by 40. But the effort never ceased. Jeffrey pushed himself like a driven soul, pursuing something I never fully comprehended. Perhaps evading the recollections of welfare food and thrift store garments, of seeing his mother tally cents at the market. The photo quivered in my rheumatic grip. That final lucid exchange in February, 3 days before the conclusion. Jeffrey's voice a mere breath, but his message keen with insistence. "She's not the person I believed, Dad." "Zella," I realized too late. "Son, you're exhausted. The drugs, the testament. I've ensured your safety. Vow you'll stand up if necessary." I'd vowed, unaware of the commitment. Thought it was the meds speaking or agony fueling suspicion. Jeffrey passed thinking I comprehended, and I'd let him down in that ultimate instance. Now positioned above his tomb while his wife reveled 50 yards distant. Those phrases seemed prophetic. Wealth hadn't preserved him. All those years amassing riches, forfeiting well-being and hours in serenity, and the illness claimed him nonetheless. The harsh irony stung deeper than Zella's barbs, but Jeffrey had been clever, more astute than his father credited. Those last months while combating for survival, he'd been advocating for mine as well. I slipped the photo into my coat pocket as Zella's tone drifted across the burial ground. "Well, it's time to address practical issues." She was advancing with her assembly of onlookers, likely plotting another communal disgrace. My hold firmed around that school image, sensing its gentle borders dig into my skin. Whatever Jeffrey had arranged, whatever safeguard he'd assured, I'd require it shortly. The precipitation intensified now, and Zella's fancy footwear would be muddied. Fine. Let her contend with something, even if merely traversing damp lawn. The pebbles ground beneath my boots as I headed to my aged Ford truck. Vehicle doors banged throughout the lot, motors igniting. Folks keen to flee the discomfort Zella had stirred at the sight. She blocked my path midway to my vehicle, her luxury heels clacking on the slick asphalt. Mrs. Henderson, Joe from First National Bank, and 3 other grievers stood by her like a panel she'd convened. Tactical placement. I knew it from my military service. "Clyde, you must grasp the facts." Zella positioned herself squarely in my way, those frosty blue eyes fixed on mine. Jeffrey granted everything to me. The residence, the enterprise, the assets, the whole lot. Her assurance was total. This wasn't posturing or fantasy. She possessed knowledge we lacked, and she relished the disclosure. I maintained my tone even like calming startled animals. "We haven't examined the testament yet, Zella." "What's there to examine?" "I'm his spouse." Her chuckle was keen enough to slice crystal. "Did you imagine he'd bestow millions on someone who never added a penny to his achievements?" The observers squirmed uneasily. Joe coughed and inspected his footwear. Mrs. Henderson gripped her bag firmer, obviously desiring to be elsewhere, but they remained. That was the intent of this minor drama, forging witnesses to her supremacy, solidifying the tale before challenges arose. "I understand this is tough," she proceeded, angling her head with feigned empathy. "But you can't dwell in illusion. Jeffrey cherished you, but he was sensible. He knew I'd require it all to uphold the life he created for us." The viciousness was astounding. Not merely the phrases, but the moment, the open arena, the spectators she'd collected to view my degradation. This lady had examined suffering like others peruse cookbooks. "Everything okay here, Clyde?" Obie Smith neared from his vintage Chevy, sensing the strain like storm signals. At 68, Obie retained the build of the rancher he'd been, with palms that could soothe a scared steed or halt a rushing steer. 3 decades of camaraderie had honed his ability to spot issues. And Zella was issues in upscale attire. "Just reviewing practical issues," Zella remarked, her annoyance at the disruption flashing on her face before the facade returned. Practical issues can hold, Obi stated calmly, placing himself somewhat between us. A fellow needs space to mourn his child. Naturally he does. Zella's grin was blade slim. That's precisely why I'm welcoming all to the residence for snacks. A fitting remembrance event. This was unexpected to me. Jeffrey would have preferred something understated, serene. But Zella was reshaping his narrative live, positioning herself as the benevolent organizer rather than the scavenger plundering his remains. That seems wonderful, Mrs. Henderson commented, evidently glad for something ordinary to concentrate on. Jeffrey would have valued that. The rest voiced consent, embracing the offer without hesitation. Zella's grin broadened as she observed them comply, affirming herself as the rightful steward of Jeffrey's legacy. You'll join as well, won't you, Clyde? Her voice was velvet over iron. It's vital that kin be present. Kin? The term was an affront cloaked in politeness, presented before people who'd known me prior to Jeffrey's birth. She was challenging me to decline, to appear stubborn and troublesome before the locals. Something's off with this, Obi whispered, edging nearer so only I heard. His rancher's senses were keener than most perceived, but the others were already moving to their cars, chatting about what foods they'd contribute and how Jeffrey would have enjoyed the assembly. Zella had adeptly commandeered my son's remembrance, converting his burial into her enthronement. I'll meet you at the residence, she declared, victory sparkling in those blue eyes. After all, it's still your son's residence for the moment. The stress on for the moment was intentional, another tiny brutality administered with exactness. She entered Jeffrey's Mercedes, her Mercedes now, and drove off, guiding the procession of grievers to what had been my dwelling for the last 3 years. I lingered in the graveyard lot, rain drenching my coat, observing rear lights fade along the primary route. The burial had concluded, but something different was commencing. Obi idled by his truck, motor humming but not departing. You ride with me, old pal. I glanced back at Jeffrey's tomb once more, then got into my truck. Whatever Zella had schemed for this remembrance event, I wouldn't confront it solo. The quarter-hour journey to the residence felt like advancing into combat, which I guessed it was. Vehicles filed into the curved drive sequentially, stones grinding under wheels as we reached the Wells family estate. Zella had arrived first, naturally, her Mercedes stationed conspicuously by the entrance stairs. She appeared before most had even killed their engines, abruptly invigorated in a manner that chilled my flesh. Please all enter for some bites. Her voice projected across the drive with dramatic flair. I've arranged a suitable remembrance assembly for Jeffrey. I exited Obi's truck deliberately, my creaky joints complaining after the extended day. Something seemed amiss about this entire setup. We hadn't organized any remembrance event. Actually, Jeffrey would have despised this commotion. Since when did she organize a remembrance? Obi grumbled softly, keeping step with me to the house. The Victorian manor appeared unchanged. White pillars encircling veranda, the vine roses my departed wife had sown 4 decades ago. But Zella posed on those front stairs like she commanded every stone and plank, which, based on what we'd observed, she likely did. Mrs. Henderson arched her brows at me as we drew near. Clyde, honey, were you aware of this assembly? No, ma'am. This is fresh to me. Zella overheard our chat and directed that rehearsed grin our way. I desired Jeffrey's companions to have a genuine opportunity to recall him. Surely you don't oppose commemorating your son's legacy. The phrasing made any dissent appear self-centered. Shrewd lady, this daughter-in-law of mine, cunning as a deceitful peddler, but shrewd. We entered the dwelling I'd deemed home for 3 years. The spot where Jeffrey entered the world, where his mother passed, where 3 lines of Wells males had resided and toiled and cherished. Now it pertained to someone who'd known Jeffrey under 2 years. That's when I spotted the arrangement. Tables were set in the eating area, draped with ivory cloths I'd never encountered. Fine porcelain was displayed, not the regular plates, but the matrimonial collection that belonged to Jeffrey's mother. Crystal goblets gleamed beneath the light fixture, and pricey-looking vintages were already decanted and aerating. This degree of readiness didn't occur in the hour post-burial. She orchestrated this, I murmured to Obi as we stowed our jackets in the entryway. Prior to the burial's close, he concurred, his rancher's gaze absorbing each element. Observe those blooms. Those aren't market bouquets. Someone commissioned these days earlier. Zella glided through the spaces like a natural entertainer, guiding guests to the parlor, providing beverages, expounding on the wine choices with expertise. Each motion shouted proprietorship, dominion, mastery. "Please settle in," she instructed, motioning to Jeffrey's preferred lounger, the hide chair where he'd passed his concluding months when the therapies left him too frail for labor. "I'll fetch drinks for all." Joe from the bank took a goblet of crimson wine that likely surpassed most folks' weekly food costs. "This is very considerate, Zella. You set this up today." Jeffrey always emphasized hospitality. She dispensed herself a plentiful serving, her hands as steady as a healer's. He would have desired his companions to recollect this occasion fittingly. Recollect it fittingly, as though the burial hadn't sufficed. As though she needed to imprint her claim over Jeffrey's legacy, too. The bell chimed, slicing through the hum of talk. Zella's eyes brightened instantly, and she nearly skipped to the entrance. "That has to be Mr. Thompson," she proclaimed to the group, her thrill hardly restrained. "Now we can handle the official affairs." Jasper Thompson stepped in, bearing his formal file holder, his demeanor expertly impartial, but his gaze locating mine across the space. Something sparked there, an expression I couldn't decipher, but it accelerated my heartbeat. The actual proceedings were set to start. 23 individuals arranged themselves in the parlor, securing spots on couches, seats, and wherever possible. The solemn vibe hung thick as grave mist. Jasper Thompson placed himself by the hearth, extracting official papers from his hide satchel with routine skill. Zella occupied the high-backed seat nearest the attorney, straightening her ebony gown and fixing her pearl strand. I chose the edge seat by the pane, the location where I'd perched endless nights observing Jeffrey toil on his computer. "I'll now proclaim the final testament of Jeffrey Michael Wells," Thompson commenced, his tone bearing the gravity of juridical power. The space grew utterly quiet, save for the faint shuffle of documents. Dated February 10th, 2025. Attested and certified per Texas regulations. Zella's shoe started rapping on the Persian carpet. Her digits drummed on the seat arm. The lady could scarcely hold back. Thompson proceeded with the routine juridical verbiage, affirmations of mental clarity, annulment of prior testaments, designation of administrator, tedious content that caused Mrs. Henderson to fidget in her spot, and Joe to glance at his timepiece. "To my dedicated workers at Wells Construction, I grant 1 month's extra pay to be shared evenly among all present employees." Thompson's delivery stayed consistent, expert. "To my relative Sarah in Houston, I grant my mother's gem assortment. To the Willow Creek Public Library, I grant $50,000 for updating the youth area, minor bequests, philanthropic gifts, individual belongings distributed among assorted kin. Typical testament elements that heightened Zella's restlessness with each passing second. "When does he reach the crucial sections?" she whispered theatrically, loud enough for much of the room to overhear. Thompson coughed and flipped to a fresh sheet. The group inhaled collectively. "To my cherished wife, Zella Marie Wells, I grant the family dwelling at 847 Magnolia Street, plus its furnishings and the amount of $25 million for my asset portfolios." Zella leaped from her seat as if propelled. I knew it. I knew Jeffrey provided for me adequately. The visitors' responses varied. Some offered courteous smiles. Others appeared uneasy with her zeal. Mrs. Henderson shared a significant look with her spouse. Even amid mourning, there were social norms most adhered to. I clenched the chair's supports, feeling the texture embed in my hands. 25 million plus the dwelling. Jeffrey had been lavish with his wife. I'd admit that. "What about?" I coughed, despising the need to inquire. "What do I get?" Thompson's gaze met mine across the space, and something exchanged between us. A glance that conveyed more than speech. "To my father, Clyde Samuel Wells, I grant all personal keepsakes, family images, and his equipment from the shed." The quiet extended like molasses. Equipment and images. After aiding in forging Jeffrey's domain, after 3 years beneath this roof, after a lifetime of devotion and forfeit, equipment and images. Zella's grin could have illuminated the entire region. She pivoted to address the assembly like a monarch speaking to her people, receiving accolades from locals who'd known Jeffrey from his infancy. "Jeffrey always promised he'd secure me," she declared, her voice echoing with victory. "He was such a considerate partner." Mrs. Henderson inclined her head courteously. "Well, dear, you're definitely secure for life now." "More than secure?" Zella's chuckle had jagged borders. "I'll never need to fret over anything again." I remained seated while she held court, watching this performance with growing clarity. This woman had never loved my son. She'd seen a meal ticket, a lifestyle, a fortune to inherit. And Jeffrey, brilliant Jeffrey, had figured it out too late. But as the congratulations continued and wine glasses clinked, Thompson caught my eye again. He was packing his documents, but he moved slowly, deliberately, and when our eyes met, he gave the slightest nod toward the kitchen. "There is one additional clause," he said quietly, his words nearly lost in the celebration. "But that requires private discussion." Zella was too busy accepting praise to notice. But I heard, and for the first time since the funeral began, something that felt almost like hope stirred in my chest. The formal reading was over, but apparently the real business was just beginning. Guests moved from the living room toward the dining area, drawn by the elaborate spread Zella had mysteriously prepared. Crystal wine glasses caught the evening light streaming through tall windows, and the good silver gleamed on white linens. This wasn't thrown together in an afternoon. This was orchestrated. Zella raised her glass high, commanding attention like a conductor before an orchestra. To Jeffrey, who always took care of those he loved most, the irony wasn't lost on me, even if it sailed over everyone else's heads. She just inherited $25 million, while I got a box of tools and some family photos. Jeffrey's definition of those he loved most apparently had some interesting nuances. "This wine is exceptional," commented Dr. Miller, swirling the burgundy liquid. "What vintage is this, Zella?" 2012 Bordeaux. Jeffrey always said life's too short for cheap wine. She moved through the room with fluid grace, playing hostess like she'd been born to money. I wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Mrs. Henderson accepted a delicate crystal glass, studying Zella with newfound interest. "You managed to prepare all this today. After the funeral and everything, when you love someone, you find the strength." Zella's smile was camera perfect. Jeffrey would have wanted his friends to celebrate his life, not just mourn his death. Celebrate was an interesting word choice for a funeral reception. Most folks called these things memorial services. But Zella seemed determined to reframe Jeffrey's death as her personal triumph. "You know," she said, settling beside Mrs. Henderson on the velvet sofa, "I've always wanted to modernize this old place, maybe open up some walls, update the kitchen." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. "But it's such a historic home, dear. Been in the Wells family for 3 generations. Well, it's my family now." Zela's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "And frankly, all this dark wood and heavy furniture feels so dreary. I'm thinking light colors, contemporary furniture. Maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room." My knuckles went white around my wine glass. This house had been in our family since 1923. My grandfather built those walls with his own hands, selected every piece of molding, planned every room. Jeffrey had been born in the upstairs bedroom, taken his first steps on these very floors. But Zella saw dollar signs and design opportunities. Joe from the bank leaned forward with professional interest. "Will you be staying in Willow Creek long term, or might you be thinking of relocating?" Zella's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Actually, I'm considering selling and moving somewhere more cosmopolitan. Maybe Dallas or even New York." The room went dead quiet. These people had known Jeffrey his entire life, watched him build his business here, create jobs for their children, support local charities. The idea of selling his family home to fund Zella's urban adventure hit them like cold water. "Jeffrey loved this house," I said quietly. "He was born here." Zella turned toward me with theatrical surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was present. "Jeffrey's dead, Clyde. It's time to live for the living, don't you think?" The mask slipped completely then. No more grieving widow. No more thoughtful hostess. Just cold calculation wrapped in designer clothes. Besides, she continued, warming to her theme, "What's the point of keeping the museum when you could have millions in cash? I could travel, buy a penthouse, really live for the first time in years." Obi stepped closer to me, his weathered face hard as granite. I could feel him fighting the urge to say something that would get us both thrown out. Mrs. Henderson began, gathering her purse, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. "Well, I should be getting home early morning tomorrow." Others followed her lead, making polite excuses and heading toward the door. Within 20 minutes, Jeffrey's memorial reception had cleared out like smoke in a windstorm. Folks who'd intended to stay all evening suddenly remembered pressing obligations. I remained in my corner chair, watching this exodus with fascination. Zella had managed to alienate Jeffrey's entire social circle in one evening. These people had come to honor my son's memory, and instead they'd gotten a front row seat to his widow's greed. By 8 only Obi and I remained. Zela stood in the suddenly quiet dining room, surveying the abandoned wine glasses and half-eaten appetizers with confusion. Well, I suppose people have busy lives, she said. But uncertainty flickered across her face for the first time all day. Obi squeezed my shoulder as he headed for the door. Call me if you need anything, old friend, and I mean anything. The front door closed with a solid thunk, leaving Zell and me alone in the house that had been my home for 3 years. She turned to face me with renewed confidence, clearly relieved to drop the public performance. Finally, she said, kicking off her expensive heels, now we can discuss your situation properly. Sound of car engines faded into the distance, leaving only the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Zella moved through the kitchen like she'd lived here her entire life, humming some tune I didn't recognize while she stacked dirty dishes with practiced efficiency. Well, that went better than I expected, she said, not bothering to look at me as she scraped leftover appetizers into the garbage disposal. Her jewelry caught the overhead light, diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years, watching this performance with growing fascination. The woman moved with complete ownership, opening cabinets like she'd memorized their contents, finding the good dishwashing liquid without searching. Zella, we need to discuss what happens next. She didn't turn around, just continued loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. What happens next? That's simple enough. When she finally faced me, her expression had shifted into something harder, more calculating. The grieving widow mask was completely gone now, replaced by cold business efficiency. Next, you pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. The words hit like physical blows, even though I'd been expecting them. This house has been in my family for 4 generations. Zella was in your family. She snapped the dish towel with sharp emphasis. Now it's legally mine. Jeffrey left me everything, remember? My hands lay flat on the worn wooden table, steady despite the fire building in my chest. 3 generations of Wellsmen had sat at this same table, planned their days, shared their meals, raised their children. Jeffrey told me you'd have trouble accepting reality, she continued, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. He said you'd probably expect to live here forever like some kind of charity case. My son never said that to me. Of course he didn't. Her laugh was sharp as breaking glass. He was too polite to hurt your feelings, but he told me plenty. She pushed off from the counter, beginning to pace around the kitchen like a lawyer addressing a jury. He said you'd been depending on him too long, that it wasn't healthy for a grown man to need his son's support at your age. Lies. Every word was fabricated poison, but delivered with such confidence that someone who didn't know Jeffrey might believe them. Look, I get it. Change is hard for old people. Her tone shifted to mock sympathy. But you need to understand something fundamental here. You own this house now legally, completely. The deed, the mortgage, the property taxes, everything. The deed may have Jeffrey's name, but this land belonged to my grandfather before Jeffrey was even born. Your grandfather didn't leave you anything, did he? She paused her pacing to stare at me directly. Face facts, Clyde. You're a charity case who's outlived his usefulness. The cruelty was breathtaking. But what struck me most was how much she was enjoying this. This wasn't just about property or money. She was savoring my apparent helplessness like fine wine. I want you out of here by tomorrow morning, she said, her voice rising with each word. And you'll take only what you can carry. No furniture, no family heirlooms, nothing that belongs to this house. I stood slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate and careful. Tomorrow morning, yes, and don't think about trying to claim anything belonged to your family. Originally, I have lawyers, Clyde, good ones. They'll tie you up in court until you're dead, for the first time since Jeffrey's funeral. I felt something that might have been a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. As you wish, Zella. The unexpected calmness in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. She'd been building toward an explosion, expecting rage or tears or desperate pleading. Instead, she got quiet acceptance. We moved from the kitchen through the dining room, past the mahogany table where Jeffrey had done his homework as a boy, into the front living room where family portraits ash-lined the mantelpiece. Zella followed me with predatory energy, clearly energized by what she saw as complete victory. I've been patient with you, Clyde, but my patience has limits. She walked around the room touching furniture possessively, the antique sofa, the carved end tables, even the brass lamp that had belonged to Jeffrey's grandmother. This couch, these antiques, even that ugly family portrait. It's all mine now. Jeffrey chose every piece carefully, I said quietly, remembering how he'd spent months finding just the right coffee table to match his mother's decorating vision. Jeffrey's taste was as outdated as yours. Her fingers trailed over surfaces like she was appraising merchandise. I'm thinking modern minimalist for the redesign. Maybe Scandinavian. Clean lines, light colors, no clutter. She was already erasing Jeffrey's memory, planning to gut everything that connected this house to its history. Here's what's going to happen, she continued, turning to face me with theatrical authority. You'll take your clothes, your medications, and leave. Nothing else belongs to you. Where exactly do you expect me to go? She shrugged, the gesture casual and devastating. Not my problem. Senior center, trailer park, maybe that friend of yours. What's his name, Obi? Maybe he'll let you sleep in his barn. I'm 65 years old, Zella. I've lived in this county my entire life. Then you should have planned better for your old age. Her smile was razor sharp. Maybe if you'd been a better father, Jeffrey would have left you something substantial instead of a box of rusty tools. The attack on my relationship with Jeffrey hit deeper than anything else she'd said. But before I could respond, she was just getting started. Jeffrey was a good son. He loved his family. Enough. The word exploded from her with startling violence. I'm sick of hearing about Jeffrey and his wonderful family and his precious memories. Her mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. He's gone. And you know what? I'm glad. She was shouting now, her carefully styled hair coming loose, her makeup smudged with fury. Now I can finally live without pretending to care about this boring town and boring people and boring family traditions. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire. She'd never loved Jeffrey, had never loved anything about the life he'd built, the community he'd served, the family he'd cherished. Get out of my sight, she snarled, her voice dropping to pure venom. Go die in some gutter where you belong. Instead of therids she clearly expected, I felt something close to peace settle over me. As you wish, Zella. Her eyes widened with confusion. What? You're not going to argue, beg, make some pathetic speech about family loyalty? No. I allowed myself a small smile. I'll just collect my things. You're just giving up. She seemed genuinely stunned by my calm acceptance. I'm respecting your wishes. You are, after all, the legal owner of this house. Why are you being so? She searched for the word so agreeable. What would be the point of fighting? I started toward the stairs, moving with deliberate dignity. You've made your position very clear. She remained in the living room, watching me with suspicion and confusion. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected or wanted. Crushing someone was only satisfying if they fought back. I'll need about an hour to pack essentials, I said from the foot of the stairs. Take whatever fits in 2 suitcases. That's it. That seems fair. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her eyes boring into my back. At the top, I paused and looked down at her. Will you be staying up to supervise? I'll be right here. Don't try anything clever. I chuckled softly, genuinely amused. At my age, what could I possibly try? As I disappeared into the upstairs hallway, I heard her pacing below, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. She'd gotten everything she wanted, but something about my reaction was bothering her. Good. Let her wonder. I left the Wells house at 6 o'clock in the morning, driving my old Ford pickup truck with everything I owned packed into 2 battered suitcases. The sun was just breaking over the Texas horizon, painting the sky the color of fresh peaches as I pulled into the parking lot of the roadside inn on Route 35. 43 years in that Victorian mansion, and it came down to this, a 12-by-4 motel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes. The polyester bedspread felt rough under my hands as I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my single open suitcase. Everything I own now, 3 changes of clothes, my medications, Jeffrey's 3rd grade school photo, and the pocket watch that had belonged to my father. Not much to show for 65 years of living, but it would have to be enough. 18-wheelers rumbled past on the highway, shaking the thin walls. Morning traffic was building. Folks heading to jobs, running errands, living their normal lives while mine had been turned upside down in the space of 24 hours. Jeffrey, I said to his photograph, I hope you knew this day might come. The motel's coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the small room with the aroma of cheap grounds and hard water. I sat at the tiny table by the window, watching traffic flow past while methodically reviewing my situation. Homeless at 65, no income beyond Social Security. No family left except a woman who'd told me to die in a gutter. But something was nagging at me. Had been nagging at me since yesterday's will reading. Jasper Thompson's meaningful look when he'd mentioned that additional clause. The way he'd nodded toward the kitchen during all the celebration. His professional demeanor, hiding something that felt almost like anticipation. Jeffrey had been the smartest man I'd ever known. Built an empire from nothing. Outmaneuvered competitors twice his size. Always stayed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Was it really possible that he'd leave his father defenseless against a woman he'd grown to distrust? I found Thompson's business card in my wallet and dialed his office number. My hands were steady, purpose replacing the grief and confusion that had clouded my thinking. Thompson Legal Services. Jasper speaking. Jasper, it's Clyde Wells. I need to speak with you. His tone shifted immediately. Concern replacing professional courtesy. Clyde, where are you? I heard that Zella insisted you leave the house immediately. She threw me out last night. Told me to go die on a trash heap, among other things. Sharp intake of breath on the other end. She said, "What? You mentioned an additional clause in Jeffrey's will yesterday. I think it's time we discussed it." The pause stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Then Thompson's voice came back, filled with something that sounded remarkably like relief. Yes, it definitely is, Time. Can you see me this morning? Can you come to my office? Say 10 Vigs, I'm at the roadside inn on Route 35. I can be there in 20 minutes. Clyde. Thompson's voice carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. Bring everything Zela said to you last night. Every cruel word, every threat, every insult. Write it down if you need to. Why? What difference does it make now? Because Jeffrey anticipated exactly this situation. Satisfaction colored his words now. Your son was even smarter than you knew. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? 10 a.m. sharp. And Clyde, you might want to bring a change of clothes back to town. Something nice for when we pay Zella a visit. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with the first real hope I'd felt since Jeffrey's diagnosis. Whatever my son had planned, whatever protection he'd built into his will, it was about to be revealed. I showered, put on my cleanest shirt, and prepared to discover just how well Jeffrey had known the woman he'd married. I arrived at Thompson's office exactly at 10 while parking my old pickup beside his familiar sedan. Downtown Willow Creek looked the same as always. Brick storefronts, American flags hanging limp in the still morning air. Folks going about their Tuesday business like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. Thompson's office occupied the second floor of the old Merchants Building. Wood-paneled walls lined with law books and family photographs. Jeffrey's portrait hung behind the desk. A formal shot from when he'd won the county's Business Leader Award 3 years back. Clyde, you look tired. Thompson stood up from his desk, genuine concern creasing his weathered face. How are you holding up at that motel? I've had better accommodations, but I'm managing. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, noting how he seemed almost energized despite the early hour. You seem almost pleased about something, Jasper. His grin was wider than I'd seen since Jeffrey's diagnosis. Clyde, tell me, did you listen carefully to every word of the will reading yesterday? What do you mean? Zella got everything. The house, the money, the business. I got Jeffrey's old tools and some photographs. That's what everyone thinks they heard. Thompson moved to the office safe, spinning the combination lock with practiced efficiency. But sometimes the most important words are the ones people don't pay attention to. He withdrew a thick manila folder, handling it like precious cargo. Your son was far more clever than Zella ever imagined. My pulse quickened as he laid the complete will on his desk. Pages spread out like a roadmap to salvation. Jasper, what are you not telling me? Jeffrey knew exactly what kind of person he'd married. Thompson's finger traced down to the bottom of page 3. Look here, section 15B. The fine print that everyone missed. I leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. The words swam into focus slowly, and when I understood them, my heart nearly stopped. Read it aloud, Clyde. The house and monetary assets transferred to my wife and Zella Marie Wells. I paused, processing the next phrase. On the condition that she provides proper care and dignified housing for my father, Clyde Samuel Wells, until his natural death. The room went silent except for the tick of Thompson's desk clock. Keep reading, he said quietly. Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall immediately revert to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation. My hands were shaking now. Jasper, she threw me out. She told me to die on a trash heap. I know she did. His satisfaction was unmistakable because Jeffrey anticipated this exact scenario. How could you possibly know what she said to me? Because your son instructed me to monitor the situation closely. He told me, Dad's going to need protection and I won't be there to provide it. Thompson pulled out another document, a legal definition sheet. The will specifically defines proper care as dignified housing, respectful treatment, and family consideration. Zella violated all three conditions within 36 hours. I felt tears building behind my eyes, grief and relief and overwhelming pride in my son's wisdom all mixing together. Jeffrey knew she would do this to me. He loved you more than his own comfort, Clyde, he said. Dad deserves better than I can give him while I'm fighting this cancer. But I can make sure he gets what he needs after I'm gone. The magnitude of it hit me like a physical blow. While fighting for his life, Jeffrey had been fighting for mine, too. He'd seen through Zella's performance, anticipated her cruelty, and built legal protection around me like a fortress. What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes with the handkerchief I'd carried for 40 years. Thompson was already gathering official papers, stamping documents with his notary seal. Now I inform Mrs. Wells of her legal situation. The inheritance is null and void as of last night. When do we tell her? This afternoon. Are you ready to face her again? I straightened my shoulders, feeling strength return for the first time in days. Jeffrey's love was still protecting me, still fighting for me even from beyond the grave. More ready than I've been since this whole nightmare started. Thompson and I spent the lunch hour preparing copies of the complete will and legal transfer documents. By 3:00, we were driving toward the Wells family home in Hisadan. Official papers organized in manila folders on the back seat. The Victorian house looked different somehow as we pulled into the circular driveway. Maybe because I now knew it didn't really belong to Zella. Had never belonged to her, despite what yesterday's abbreviated will reading had suggested. Thompson rang the doorbell while I stood slightly behind him, holding the document folder. The sound of heels clicking on hardwood announced Zella's approach. I'm not expecting anyone, she called through the door. When it opened, she appeared in casual clothes, designer jeans, and a silk blouse, her hair in rollers like she'd been preparing for an evening out. The sight of me standing on what she considered her doorstep ignited immediate fury. What are you doing here? I told you never to come back to this house. Zella, we brought you something interesting, I said calmly. Thompson stepped forward with professional authority. Mrs. Wells, we need to discuss your husband's will. There are some aspects you may have missed. The will was read yesterday, everything's settled. You're both trespassing on my property. Actually, ma'am, you may want to review the complete document before making that claim. Thompson extended the official copy toward her. Multiple pages, legal letterhead, raised seals, clearly authentic legal documentation. She snatched it suspiciously. What is this supposed to be? The full version of Jeffrey's last will and testament, I replied. Not the abbreviated reading you heard yesterday. Zella scanned the first 2 pages, recognizing familiar text about charitable donations and personal items. Her confusion grew as she found everything matching her memory. This looks the same as what you read before. Keep reading, Thompson said quietly. Page 3, Section 15B. I watched her face carefully as she found the section, watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. Her hands began trembling as she read Jeffrey's protection clause. This is fake, she screamed the words, spittle flying from her mouth. This clause wasn't in the original will. Yesterday you didn't listen to the complete reading, I said. You were too busy planning your celebration. You forged this. You added this section after Jeffrey died. Thompson's voice remained professionally calm. Ma'am, I assure you this document is completely authentic. The original is in my office safe, witnessed and notarized according to Texas state law. I want to see the original. This is fraud. This is impossible. She examined every page frantically, looking for signs of tampering, alterations, anything to support her desperation. But Thompson was meticulous. Every seal was authentic, every signature verified, every legal detail perfect. Proper care and housing for my father, she read aloud, her voice dropping to a whisper as the reality began penetrating her shock. You violated that condition approximately 36 hours ago. Thompson informed her when you evicted Mr. Wells and told him to, quote, die on a trash heap. This can't be legal. There must be some mistake, some loophole. I stepped forward, feeling Jeffrey's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. No mistake, Zella, my son knew exactly who you were. She looked between Thompson and me, understanding finally dawning in those cold blue eyes. The calculation, the planning, the legal trap. It had all been laid months before Jeffrey died. He planned this, she whispered. He actually planned this whole thing. Perhaps we should discuss the legal implications inside, Thompson suggested. This is a neighborhood after all. Zella nodded mechanically, stepping back from the doorway. Yes. Come in." As we crossed the threshold into what had been my home for 3 years, I couldn't help observing how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. Yesterday, Zella had been the righteous property owner. Today, she was about to learn that ownership was far more complicated than she'd imagined. We gathered in the same living room where yesterday's will reading had taken place, but everything felt different now. Zella collapsed into the wing-back chair she'd claimed as her throne, while Thompson and I took positions near Jeffrey's photograph on the mantelpiece. "Mrs. Wells, according to Section 15B of your husband's will, you have violated the inheritance conditions." Thompson's voice carried the weight of legal finality. "The entire estate, house, and monetary assets now transfers to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation." "This can't be happening." Zella's voice was barely above a whisper, her hands covering her face. "This can't actually be happening. By evicting Mr. Wells and telling him to die on a trash heap, you've nullified your claim to the inheritance. The will specifically requires dignified treatment and respectful housing, but I didn't mean it literally. It was just I was angry. People say things when they're angry." Thompson consulted his legal notes. The document specifies that verbal abuse constitutes grounds for inheritance forfeit. Intent is irrelevant under Texas law. I settled into Jeffrey's favorite recliner, the leather chair where he'd spent his final months, too weak from treatments to work. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday I'd been homeless. Today I was home. "Now we need to discuss living arrangements," I said quietly. Zella looked up, confusion mixing with her despair. "What do you mean?" "This is still the Wells family home. It always was." I gestured toward the family portraits lining the mantelpiece. "The foundation has agreed to let me remain as permanent resident." Thompson nodded, confirmation. "Mr. Wells has been granted lifetime residency rights as part of the inheritance transfer. You can stay too, Zella, but under my rules now." What kind of rules?" Her voice was small. "Defeated respect, basic human decency, and never again suggesting that anyone should die on a trash heap. I kept my tone level without vindictiveness, the same courtesy I would have shown you." "What if I apologize?" Desperation crept into her voice. "What if I take back everything I said?" "The legal violation has already occurred," Thompson explained. "The inheritance transfer is irreversible under the will's terms." I leaned forward, studying the woman who tried to destroy me less than 48 hours ago. Jeffrey knew this day would come. He protected both of us. Both of us. You get a roof over your head and dignity. You get the same. The foundation provides living stipends for both residents. I touched Jeffrey's photograph gently. Myson was wiser than either of us realized. "I lost everything." Zella's whisper was broken, defeated. "Everything I planned, everything I dreamed." "You lost everything you tried to steal," I corrected. "There's a difference." Thompson packed his documents efficiently, professional satisfaction evident in his movements. "I'll file the transfer papers tomorrow morning. The foundation assumes legal ownership by Friday." "Jeffrey gave me something more valuable than money," I said, straightening my son's photograph on the side table. Zella looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Justice and the knowledge that he truly loved me." My voice caught slightly. "He told me in the hospital, 'Dad, I took care of you.' I didn't understand what he meant then." "Your son spent months crafting this protection," Thompson added. "He anticipated exactly what might happen and built legal safeguards around it." As Thompson prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of completion. Jeffrey's love had transcended death itself, reaching forward through legal documents to shield me when I needed it most. "See, Zella, you can stay as long as you follow house rules," I said as Thompson gathered his briefcase. "Treat people with respect. Contribute to the household peacefully. Remember that this is a home, not a hotel." She nodded numbly. "What choice do I have?" "The same choice you gave me 2 days ago." "But I'm not you." Thompson shook my hand at the front door. "Justice has been served, Clyde. Jeffrey would be proud." As his car pulled away, I returned to the living room where Zella sat, staring at the wall. For the first time since Jeffrey's death, we were alone together, as equals. Two people dependent on the same charity, living under the same roof, bound together by circumstances neither of us could change. "We'll find a way to live together respectfully," I said. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "about what I said about everything. Sorry is a start. Respect is what matters going forward." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4, marking time in a house that now belonged to neither of us and both of us. Jeffrey's final gift wasn't justice. It was the possibility of redemption, even for those who didn't deserve it. Outside, Texas afternoon light streamed through the windows my late wife had chosen, illuminating family photographs that would remain on these walls long after Zell and I were gone. The Wells family home would endure, protected by love that reached beyond the grave. Some victories are worth waiting for. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.